one told you life was gonna be this way? Your job's a joke, you broke, your love life's the old way. It's like you're always stuck in second gear. When it hasn't been your day, or maybe your month, or maybe your year. But I'll be there for you.
Orale way! Welcome back to Mr. D's class. We are on our final stage of the actual revolution, and today we're going to discuss Carranza's presidency. Last time we discussed a bit of a civil war that went down between Villa, Carranza, and Obregon. Remember how it worked out. Obregon gets to an empty capital because Huerta just left. Then Villa, Zapata, Carranza, and Obregon begin vying for power. A convention meets up in which folks try to see if they can have a meeting of the minds. In this convention, the parties agree to at least pass Zapata's Plan de Ayala, the idea that we got to give land back to the Mexican people. It also agrees to have Carranza step down and Villa lose his northern army. Carranza leaves to Veracruz, and basically Obregon follows him because he hates Villa so much. So now we've got the last part of this little civil war, in which it's Villa and Zapata, the two, they speak for the people, they have been fighting this entire time, versus Obregon the general and Carranza. This is the bearded guy who has been fighting against Huerta. Now, Villa's strategy, and they call him the conventionists because they believe in the convention, basically control northern Mexico with a larger army. That was his strategy, and he was pretty cocky about it. Carranza/Obregon strategy basically is to use American arms, be a better politician, and use Obregon's military skill to defeat the rebels. It all culminates at the Battle of Celaya, in which Pancho Villa doesn't listen to his generals, doesn't listen to his mentors, pretty much gets his soldiers shot down by the American-made Gatling guns, and it is the end of his northern army. He tries to retaliate to the United States and attack a little town, and he's never found again. And he's left as a Mexican legend, although his time will come soon. So let's begin today with Carranza's politics. I'll pause so you can copy. All right, so Carranza, he's elected in 1916, and as soon as he's the president, he challenges the government to create a new constitution. And it's going to get a bit dark for Carranza now. So he seemed like a pretty good guy before, but you know how this whole soap opera works. So Carranza is trying to push a draft to Congress that basically has no land reform, no labor rights, much of the same problems as the past. But Obregon, the one-armed man who fought in these wars, he's pushing his people to pass the most progressive constitution of all time. And lucky for the revolutionaries and lucky for Mexico's history, the actual constitution, when it's drafted, will look more like Obregon had hoped. Basically, and we'll go into this constitution later in the third slide, it's going to be a big blow to the church and the corporations and the landowners who just dominated Mexico this entire time. And its application and the enforcement of the Constitution, it'll vary between the presidencies of Obregon, a man named Plutarco Calles, and a guy named Lázaro Cárdenas. These are the next series of lectures we'll be hearing in the future, between 1920 and 1940. Now, why do we remember Carranza, other than he being the president that this Constitution was created under his role, which is huge, but he wasn't happy about it, but it was huge. So we remember him for opposing agrarian reform. This would be, rights for the farmers. A union that was enormous called CROM in Spanish. It's in English. The translation is the Confederation of Mexican Workers, Confederación Regional de Obreros Mexicanos. It would be formed against him. So that's labor against him, farmers against him. He did eventually assassinate Zapata, a hero, a Mexican hero, and he would then try to undermine the 1920s elections in his favor against Obregon. So it's getting dark. It's getting dark for the bearded guy. We thought it would be light. It's getting dark. Here we can see a pretty cool graffiti piece, a more modern take. You can see the street art right there in the Constitution of 1917. It was created under his leadership, but not in the way that he wanted it to be. This Constitution is an enormous deal. Here we can have a mural. Here's a mural on the revolution. You can see that the two heroes here are Madero and Carranza, even though, as we know now in particular, they were not really fighting for workers' rights and labor rights like Villa and Zapata were. So who are the real heroes here? Is it these two on the sides, or is it these two in the centerpiece? I don't know. Interesting. Here we can see Carranza and Obregon leading the way, right next to each other, and this will be the future leader, Obregon, the one-armed man of the future. Here we can see a more modern take, the Constitution 1917 with the soldaderas, I can't pronounce that word, and the people fighting, and the Constitution right here in Carranza's hands. So the legacy, Crom, the Union, this huge Union will fight against him. He will kill Zapata. There is that very sad photo of Zapata finally killed, that beautiful mustache of his, and he'll try to undermine the election against Obregon. So let's watch a video on the death of Zapata, yet another hero fallen in this novela.
General Pablo González was given the responsibility by Carranza to basically bring Zapata in, dead or alive. So González hatched a plot in which one of his military officers, by the name of Guajardo, would pretend to want to defect to the Zapatista side. And they were so ruthless, Guajardo ambushes federal troops. Scores of federal troops are killed in this performance to convince Zapata that in fact Guajardo is sincere in his desire to defect. And so a meeting is set up in which Zapata is to go to this hacienda to sign the accord that would bring Guajardo into the Zapatista camp.
Entonces le manda a decir Guajardo Zapata que quería hablar con él, que lo invitaba a comer allí en Chinameca, una hacienda en Chinameca.
On that day, he takes only a handful of his most trusted lieutenants. And there was a man playing the trumpet. This was allegedly a salute upon Zapata's entry into the hacienda. And when he actually came into the courtyard of the hacienda, when the gates opened, the men who were allegedly going to give him a gun salute trained their rifles on Zapata.
Damn, I know, right? That's a sad one. That was a loss for Mexico right there. Let's continue, but first let's pause so you can write this down. All right. Yet another plan, yet another plan. So, Carranza versus Obregon. Remember, Carranza is trying to rig the elections of 1920. He's been in power for 4 years now. And he's trying to rig them against Obregon. Now, Obregon is going to put forward the final plan you got to know for this series of lectures, called the Plan de Agua Prieta. And he puts it forward alongside two people you're going to know very well in the future, Plutarco Calles and Adolfo de la Huerta. And basically, they called the nation up to arms against Carranza. Now, luckily for Obregon, the caudillos, these are the military political leaders, they joined Obregon's side. Remember, he was the military man, the one-armed man who was the revolutionary hero. All right, he's the one that did the hard work. So as soon as Carranza saw the writing on the wall, he fled, the old fleeing to Veracruz. We've seen this happen now 3 times. Unfortunately for him, on the way there, he was assassinated. So that's 2 assassinations in one lecture. Man, the soap opera is kind of crazy, isn't it? De la Huerta was made the interim president, and, for better or for worse, Carranza's death represents the end of the old regime. And now all the revolutionary leaders are from a different generation. Their goal is to make this constitution created under Carranza a reality. So it's one thing to write these laws, which we'll go over right now. It's another thing to actually implement them in a society that the rich don't want you to have it. So here we can see the Plan de Agua Prieta put forward by Obregon alongside Plutarco Calles and Adolfo de la Huerta. We'll talk about those guys in the future. Final plan, and here we can see the death of the bearded fellow Carranza. On his way to Veracruz, he was assassinated. So I guess, maybe that's revenge for Zapata's death. Who knows? So another video, the death of Carranza. So much death in today's lecture.
La muerte. Una tristeza. Casi que fue nuestro padre.
que nos quitó el yugo de la frente.
That he was assassinated by the forces of Carranza seemed almost inevitable. He died an honorable, honest man. And that is why Zapata is still looked upon as a kind of hero by so many Mexicanos.
Carranza's assassination of Zapata triggers a series of events that will determine his own fate.
Every president realizes that he must be able to put this metaphor, this tiger, into its cage, or it has the potential of literally devouring his presidency and perhaps even killing him.
Los zapatistas que continúan peleando se alían con Álvaro Obregón para derrocar en 1920 al entonces presidente Carranza, Venustiano Carranza.
Sensing his own vulnerability, Carranza attempts to escape to Veracruz by train. He takes with him all the assets of his administration, but the so-called Golden Train is sabotaged en route. Carranza is assassinated that night. With Carranza safely out of the way, Álvaro Obregón campaigns for the presidency, and he wins. He is inaugurated in 1920, promising to leave behind the decade of violence and to begin to rebuild Mexico.
A tragedy, I know. A long last slide for today, but a slide you have to know. They have entire essay questions on this slide alone. The Constitution of 1917, it's a pretty freaking big deal. Let me just pause so you can write it. All right, let's talk about the articles. As you know, constitutions are divided into articles, each article being an important law. That is the most important laws of the land. In this instance, this will be one of the most futuristic constitution of its time. For 1917, it's making huge changes. Let's talk about the most important ones first. Article 27, land reform. So now, with this part of the Constitution, Mexico can now take control and distribute property in the public's interest. So this is exactly what Zapata wanted. Moreover, any issues of foreign ownership will be dealt in Mexican courts, not by force, not by companies coming in and using their own strong men to kill any protesters or strikers. Speaking of which, Article 123, labor reform. We can now have unions in Mexico. There are limits on the working hours. Mexicans now will get days off and fair pay equal at least to the foreigners. They'll get workman's compensation. That's when you get hurt on the job. They'll pay you for like your arm. If you lose your arm, they'll pay you several thousand pesos so that you can at least retire with something instead of just being unable to work. Payments to people must be made in cash, not scrip, which was like that credit that only exists on the hacienda, and not in silver or gold, but in cash. There are safety standards. People get maternity leave, so if you get pregnant, you can go and be with your child for a bit. Article 24 and 130 dealt with the church. In a very religious country, freedom of religion is kind of a big deal, but the real problem with the church was the idea of land ownership. Land ownership is now only for the purpose of worship. No longer can they just own huge tracts of land for political purposes and try to put forward their Catholic ideologies. There's also a limitation on the numbers of priests that can be in Mexico. There was a lot of priests, and they had both a religious and political role in the country. Ceremonies were now a matter of state, so if you wanted to get married, you'd have to ask the state, not solely the church. And it censored their political role. No longer can they influence politics. As you've seen in the past, the church supported people like Porfirio Diaz and people like Huerta instead of those that actually wanted to benefit the Mexican people. In terms of education, Article 3 frees education of the religiousness of it. It makes school mandatory, it makes it free, and curriculum would be based, instead of religion, on scientific thought and democracy. This is huge, you guys, for 1917. Other important articles to think about, Women equal under the law, Article 4. The right to assemble, to meet up, and the right to petition against your government if there's any issues. Due process of law, fair no matter who you are under the court system, and no retroactive laws. You can't be charged with something after the fact that wasn't a crime when you committed it. Freedom of expression, you can say what you want and not be in trouble for it. Freedom of the press, write what you want, inform the people. The right to own guns, that's the article, the right to bear arms for us, and no cruel and unusual punishments. So a lot of the same kinds of things you see in our own Constitution of 1770, when we declared independence. But maybe the most important difference of all would be Article 32/33, that Mexican citizens and their treatment will trump that of foreigners. That is huge. Think about how far we've come from when we began this lecture series. So let's review, and I'm going to review also by showing you some of these beautiful murals you can find in Mexico about the revolution. It's truly a big piece of its history. So Article 27, land goes back to the people. There you can see a mural of Zapata. That's what he wanted. 123, workers get much more rights, much more advanced than most countries in the 1920s. Article 130, church reform. There you can see the church right there. Freedom of religion and no more assets belonging to the church. Education for all, Article 3. Equality of the sexes. There's a mural of the Soledad, and right in the back you can see Frida, one of the famous artists from Mexico. Mexico for the Mexicans. Maybe that's the most important one of all, and I love this little piece. Tierra y libertad, one of the famous quotes of the revolution. Freedom of expression and of assembly, so the right to meet up and petition against the government and take back what belongs to you. I love this little mural right here by Siqueiros. One last video for today on the Constitution. It's a short one.
On domestic issues. For the time being, General Villa has been marginalized, and his occasional fighting is restricted to Chihuahua. Carranza now turns his attention to a larger goal, a new constitution for Mexico. He calls for a constitutional convention. But instead of the moderate reforms he envisions, the Constitution, as ratified, provides unprecedented rights for its poor and working classes.
There are a number of provisions which directly address the concerns of workers as far as the right to strike, the right to organize, the setting of limits on the length of the workday, and so on.
But the most important provision deals with the land. Article 27 guarantees that only Mexico and its citizens own the natural resources above and below the ground. The Constitution also promises agrarian reform, much as Zapata had envisioned.
La Constitución fue como un mapa del país que queríamos. Ahora, como en todo el mundo, que ese mapa se haya puesto en práctica tal como se preveía, pues no se puso en práctica.
Carranza's dismissal of the promises of the new Constitution is seen by Zapata as yet another betrayal by the powers in Mexico City. He accelerates his campaign against the federal troops, engaging in skirmishes and destroying railroad lines just outside Mexico City.
All right, surprise! You've got an exam next class. This one is going to be the hardest of your 4 exams you're going to have on this material concerning the Mexican Revolution because it requires the most memorization. All right? You got to know who's who. You got to know what each plan means, so it's plenty to memorize, and you're only going to have 30 minutes to give me an outline. So the question is, examine the major stages of the Mexican Revolution for these past 10 years that we've studied, and explain the programs of 3 of the important leaders. So you can choose the 3. Is it going to be the Plan de San Luis Potosí, the Plan de Ayala, the Plan de Guadalupe, the Plan de Agua Prieta? Why did it exist? Why did they have to make the plan, and why is it significant? Make sure you have a thesis. You might want to just go by the thesis being each leader. That would be easy, right? Make sure that your headers refer to each leader. Show me that you understand the material. Remember some of these facts. You know you want to give at least 10 to 15 facts here. Memorize some of this stuff for the sake of your grade. Use the earplugs I gave you on your first exam. If you lost the earplugs, I'll give you the ones that I have if I have any extras, but I gave everybody 2. If you lost yours already, it's your bad. You have to just go and listen to me lecture. And remember, no need for a conclusion. Just give me the thesis and your 3 body paragraphs and some basic facts that are relevant to each body. Good luck studying for this one. I think this will be the toughest of your exams. If you understand this stuff, you're pretty much going to be set. All right? Good luck.